Okay, now, when we speak about the Abhidhamma, well, let me backtrack and take this from a different angle. Okay, now we should know that historically, the Abhidhamma belongs to a period of Buddhist history, which historians of Buddhism designate sometimes as the sectarian period. This is, you see, people who have a superficial understanding of Buddhism group all of early Buddhism together and just think of it as sometimes the Hinayana period, or just use the label early Buddhism. But actually we distinguish a stage called early Buddhism, which would be the period in which the Sangha was more or less unified and pretty much centered around northeast India, the area where the Buddha lived and wandered and taught. So we distinguish between early Buddhism or archaic Buddhism and a later period which is called the sectarian period. And what happened over time is that as Buddhism spread from the northeast over northern India and even to southern India, it became probably established and centered around different monasteries in those regions. And so because the different groups that were centered in different geographical regions all emerged from the original Sangha, the Sangha of archaic Buddhism, of ancient Buddhism, their Sutta Pitakas, their collections of discourses, are very similar. The organization is different, sometimes the wording is different, but we can compare Pali versions of the Nikayas with the Chinese Agamas and some texts that have been discovered in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and so on. And we see that there's a great deal of agreement as far as even the wording goes, and certainly as far as the doctrines go. The Vinaya Pitaka, the collection of monastic discipline, is very similar. But even here, differences, though the basic rules are the same, but differences of presentation are becoming more evident. But now we have what has been preserved for us are 3 different Abhidhamma Pitakas, which show considerable differences. And so when we speak about the Abhidhamma, we have to be careful to distinguish which Abhidhamma we're talking about. In the countries of Southern Asia, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, when they speak about Abhidhamma, everybody just naturally understands the Pali version. But in fact, Buddhism spread to different areas. It spread to Western India. And so from West India, it moved down to Sri Lanka. And then from Sri Lanka, it moved to Southeast Asia, Burma, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. And so the Abhidhamma tradition that's been preserved in South and Southeast Asia, this is the Theravada Abhidhamma, which is preserved in an ancient Indian language, the language we call Pali. But there was another branch of the Buddhist order which settled in the northwest of India, in the area that's now corresponds to Kashmir. And this school developed its own quite distinct system of thought, system of Abhidhamma. That school is called the Sarvastivada school, the school that proclaimed that everything exists. And they developed their own Abhidhamma Pitaka, which probably was composed originally in Sanskrit. And then, because the northwest of India could lead on to the trade routes going over to China, this version of the Abhidhamma was brought to China and then translated from Sanskrit into Chinese. And so now we have it in Chinese translation. The Sanskrit original is mostly lost, but we still have it in Chinese translation. And then based upon the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, a treatise was composed as a kind of compendium or synopsis of that whole Abhidhamma system, which is called the Abhidharma Kosha. And this is a work which is studied by monks, learned monks in the East Asian tradition, China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and in Tibet by Tibetan monks. And then there was one school which migrated from India all the ways to the northwest to an area which now corresponds to western Pakistan and the eastern Afghanistan, an area called Gandhara. And that school was called the Dharmaguptaka. And they probably had a full Abhidhamma Pitaka, but only one book of their system has survived, and it was preserved in Chinese translation. And it's called the Sariputra Abhidhamma Treatise. And it's not preserved by any living tradition. But what's interesting is that there seemed to have been close affiliation between the Dharmaguptaka school and the Theravada school, which went to South Asia. And so there is a fair degree of correspondence between this Abhidhamma treatise preserved in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Abhidhamma system that flourished in Sri Lanka and Burma and so on. Okay, and so the Abhidhamma treatise that we'll be studying over the next few days, this is coming from a kind of synopsis of the Pali or Theravada Abhidhamma system, the form of Abhidhamma that prevails in the countries of Southern Asia. Okay, now I want to give a broad overview of the main features of the Abhidhamma. That is, to raise the question, maybe it's the primary question that we should be trying to answer, and that is, what is going on in the Abhidhamma? I don't know if anybody here has ever tried to read an Abhidhamma canonical text. Has there anybody who's ever tried to do that? If you have. Canonical. You did? That long? Going 8 hours a day or...
Another day,
wow.
And then I still have the page of notes, and then I quit.
Okay.
It was too hard. That's why I'm here.
Because without some knowledge of what is going on in the Abhidhamma, just picking up an Abhidhamma text and looking at it, I try to think of a good simile, eating sawdust. Um, reading a telephone book? Doing spreadsheets with with an accounting program? Okay, but when you understand what's going on in the Abhidhamma, at least that gives one a kind of handle for getting a grip on what is taking place in the text. So I've tried to lay out or break down the Abhidhamma project into... What's so funny? Yeah, I don't... Oh, I yeah. No, I intended that quite seriously. Okay, so 3 aspects of the Abhidhamma project, or if you found that funny, you'll be laughing over the next one. The Abhidhamma enterprise, like the American Enterprise Institute. Hello, is this the American Enterprise Institute? Yeah. Do you have anything going on with the Abhidhamma? Well, in fact, we just happened to get a shipment of these books. I opened them and couldn't understand what they were saying. Okay, so the 3 aspects to the Abhidhamma project. First, I'll give the headings, then I'll elaborate. One is what I call the Dhamma theory, which means an investigation of the bare facts of experience, or the bare factors of experience. The second is an attribute or quality matika, that is a master list, a very broad, comprehensive outline of contrasting and complementing qualities, which is to be used to classify the different factors of experience that emerge from the Dhamma theory. And then the third major project of the Abhidhamma is to articulate what I call a detailed typology, or classification of consciousness. That is a way of mapping the Dhammas, mapping all of the factors of experience setting them in relationship to the mind, setting them in relationship to conscious experience. Okay, first is the Dhamma theory. And now, when we use the word Dhamma, usually, we think of Dhamma with a capital D as the Buddha's teaching. But the word Dhamma is used even in the suttas in another sense, a sense that seems quite unique to the Buddha. I don't believe that the word Dhamma is used in this sense in any of the non-Buddhist texts, certainly not in the Vedas or Upanishads. And that is the word Dhamma is used in the plural to mean factors of mind, factors of experience, or simply existent things, existent realities. And so what the Abhidhamma does is to bring together all of these factors of existence, factors of experience, expounded by the Buddha in the suttas, and take them to be the basic constituents of experience, sort of the bare factors of experience that lie beneath our conceptual picture of the world. And so what the Abhidhamma does is to make a distinction between our ordinary, unenlightened conception of the world, our ordinary, okay, I'll be frank, our ordinary deluded picture of the world, in which what we do is superimpose our mental constructions upon the bare facts of actuality, the basic factors of existence. And then we build up a picture of the world which is determined not by the things themselves, not by the actualities, but by our mental conceptual constructions, which are then projected out upon the world, so that our picture of the world reflects our subjective biases, our prejudices, our delusions, rather than the realities of experience themselves. To give an example at a rather coarse level, okay, we have images of people, so we distinguish, this is my friend, this is my troublemaker. What do you call that kind of person? The enemy is too strong. What? My pain in the neck. Excuse me? No, not a stranger. This is a person who gives trouble that you don't like. Okay, the person comes into the room. If your friend comes in, you feel happy, and the whole room seems to light up. The troublemaker comes into the room, and you're heading for the exit. Or you feel your muscles tighten, you want to get away, or you feel you're going to speak angrily. And so this is just a person, not different from you, but there comes the projection, friend, I'm happy, how are you? Let's go get a cup of tea. What's new? Blah, 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 blah. The pain in the neck. Who invited him? What's he doing here? Get him out. I don't want him here. So all of this is building up. And maybe he's really a nice guy, but just he reminds you of your, not the mother, this is not the, we're not getting into Oedipus complexes. Reminds you of, the kid in third grade who used to beat you up. So you never talk to the guy, but just he looks a little bit like the third grade bully, and so you don't like him. So all of these are mental projections. So what the Abhidhammikas say is that so much of our picture of the world is just mental projection on what is just a process of dhammas, of bare phenomena, mental and physical phenomena arising and passing a way through conditions. And so the Abhidhamma distinguishes between the basic factors of experience, which are said to be sometimes truly existent, really there, arising and passing through conditions, and the fabricated reality, the conceptually constructed reality, which is the product of mental activity and then superimposed upon the actualities. And so what the Dhamma theory attempts to do is to lay out what are those basic factors of experience. And that is especially important because the factors of experience are what we have to see and understand with insight. So there are two ways to look at the Dhamma theory. One is to see it as a kind of what I would call a pseudo-scientific attempt to compile a catalog of everything that exists in the world. And when you take it in that way, as I have to say many Theravadins do, then it seems to me that it becomes almost a kind of metaphysical theory, that there is ultimate reality and conventional reality. But another way to look at the Dhamma theory, the way I prefer to see it, is as a guide to insight, a kind of map of the factors that are to be understood, rather than a photograph. Like a map of, say, New York State isn't a photograph. It doesn't pretend to show everything in New York State, including the teacups in my living room. But it just shows, from a certain perspective, the roads, the mountain ranges, the towns and cities, to guide the traveler who has to travel through New York State. So we can look at the Dhamma theory as a way of laying out the terrain, the topography of phenomena, mental and physical phenomena that we have to penetrate with insight. Okay, so this is the first project of the Abhidhamma enterprise, the Dhamma theory. Okay, the second important, or second project of the Abhidhamma is what I call the attribute matika. Actually, the term is not original with myself. It was used by an Austrian scholar named Frauwallner. But we could call it a table or list of qualities, of the most important qualities that can be used for classifying the dhammas, the basic factors of experience. And we find the master outline, the master list or table at the beginning of the first book of the Abhidhamma, called the Dhammasangani. And this table lays out a scheme of 122 Abhidhamma categories, or let's say 122 headings. And these 122 are divided into 22 triads. That means a group of 3, and 100 dyads. That means pairs. For example, in the triads, a group of 3, we have the attributes or qualities wholesome, unwholesome, neither wholesome nor unwholesome. Another triad might be associated with pleasant feeling, associated with neutral feeling, associated with painful feeling, associated with neutral feeling. Another triad might be limited or inferior phenomena, exalted or superior phenomena, and supreme phenomena. Okay, so these are some of the triads. Then you don't really have to be worried about these. So we're not going, except for the wholesome, unwholesome, neutral. We won't be dealing with them. Okay, the dyads, pairs, might take the form, for example, of factors that are roots, factors that are not roots. Another pair, factors that involve clinging, factors that do not involve clinging. Factors that have conditions, factors that do not have conditions. Factors that are material, factors that are non-material, and so on. So we get 100 of these pairs or dyads. Okay, so this is the attribute matika, which we won't be concerned with on this course, but it just underlies at least the wholesome, unwholesome, indeterminate triad is very fundamental to what we'll be studying. Okay, then the third major project of the Abhidhamma enterprise is what I called the classification of consciousness, or the typology of consciousness. And here, the Abhidhamma is continuing or pursuing the analytical treatment of experience that is already found in the Nikayas, of treating experience in terms of occasions of consciousness, occasions of mind, different states of mind arising on different occasions. And so the classification of consciousness is intended to provide a kind of broad overview, a comprehensive picture of the different states of mind, the different states of consciousness that arise in human beings and other living beings. And it's a map of consciousness which is presented in order to serve as a guide in following the Buddha's path to liberation. Sometimes the Abhidhamma is described as a psychology, like in, in the subtitle of this book, sort of the publisher, actually you have a different edition, I think. You have the American edition, I have the Sri Lankan edition. It's the same book. So this was called, to get people in the West interested, since everybody was interested in psychology. So we call it the philosophical psychology of Buddhism. Yeah. So, wow. So the question arises, is Abhidhamma really a psychology? And what I would say is that, in a sense, yes, but it's quite different from Western psychology. First, it's different from Western, call this experimental psychology, in that it's not, in my opinion, it's not intended to provide an objective description of the mind that can be validated according to experimental standards, external experimental standards, like a Western scientific model, like you get a bunch of rats in a cage, you put a piece of cheese here in a box, and you apply electric shock when you put a piece of cheese here, just a piece of clay here, And when they go to the clay, you give them an electric shock, and that way you get them to go to the cheese, and so you find out whether rats can learn or not. Actually, rats don't need an electric shock. They'll go to the cheese anyway. That's why we lock the cheese up in cupboards. Okay, so it's not intended to be sort of an experimental kind of psychology. And I don't see it also as quite a system of psychotherapy, like Western psychotherapies intended to do with psychological discontent or psychological illnesses like neuroses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and so on. But rather, the Abhidhamma, to the extent it's a psychology, is guided by the aims of Buddha's spiritual practice. And so I would sum up the aims of Buddha's spiritual practice that determine the map of the mind that emerges in the Abhidhamma. I would sum up those aims under 3 headings. First, the aim is to show the states of mind that create unwholesome karma, that create suffering for ourselves here and now, and that create unwholesome karma. States of mind that will lead to lower rebirths and that will keep us in bondage to the round of birth and death. And so it lays out what are those kinds of mental states in order that we can avoid them. The second aim is to show what are the wholesome mental states that bring happiness, peace, and harmony here and now, that create wholesome karma, and that will lead to happy states of rebirth. So it shows what those states are so that we can nurture and develop those states in order that we can reap happiness and assure ourselves of a fortunate rebirth. And then the third aim is to show the particular states of mind and mental qualities that are to be developed in order to break out of the cage of samsara and realize the ultimate goal of the Buddha's teaching, that is the state of liberation. So these are the world-transcending, supramundane, wholesome states that are to be aroused, developed, and brought to fulfillment. Okay, that will be my basic presentation. Originally, we were supposed to stop the whole thing by 8:15, but I think what we can do tonight, we could leave 10 minutes for questions, then we'll have a half an hour concluding meditation. So if there's any questions on what I presented this evening that don't lead into what I'm going to cover over the next few days, please feel welcome to ask. Wait, please, when you called on to ask the question, please wait till you get the microphone so everything is recorded.
Speaking loud. Hi, how are you? Typography. I understood topography on the second classification,
Yeah.
but I'm not familiar with the word typography.
Oh, actually, I wonder if that's a wrong word. Typology, I'm sorry. Typography, as Marcy
Maybe you
can
said
tell us,
typology and I understood typography though.
it should be typology.
Typology?
The classification. Typography is when a person is setting a book for print,
Right.
what type they choose. The body text in Times Roman, headings in Arial or Calibri and so on. Yeah, typology, I'm sorry. Don't feel shy if you have questions. Okay, this gentleman right in the front row.
When you're talking about Dhamma theory, I think Rupert Gethin talks about in relation to them being like atoms. In a way, would you agree, disagree with that? The ideas of Dhamma, the Dhammas.
I would be. Does Rupert Gethin make that statement in regard to the Theravada Abhidhamma?
I would have to reread exactly what he says, but in a broad sense.
Okay, I would be hesitant quite to interpret the Dhamma theory as a kind of atomism for at least two reasons. One is that according to the atom theory, atoms are basic building blocks of matter which retain their identity and enter into different combinations to form molecules and then when if the molecule is split, the different atoms will emerge, essentially identical with themselves. I'm not, let me finish then maybe, okay. Whereas the Dhammas are seen to be constantly to have a momentary existence, just arising, existing for a brief moment, and then passing away. Okay, so that is, I said that there are two considerations why I'm hesitant to pair the Dhamma theory with the atomic theory. So one is that the Dhammas are impermanent, constantly arising, passing away. The second is that, okay, in the atom theory, the atoms have their own individual self-nature, which doesn't depend on anything else. The atoms remain in principle independent, but they enter through the play of circumstances, they enter into combinations. But according to the Buddhist Abhidhamma philosophy, the Dhammas always arise from a multiplicity of conditions. So we can say that a Dhamma always exists relationally. It exists relationally to the totality of prior existence, previously arisen Dhammas, which enter into its origination. It exists in a relationship to other Dhammas contemporary with itself, and also any Dhamma becomes a condition for the onward flowing process of experience, of existence. And so through its causal role, a Dhamma will become a cause or condition for the arising of other Dhammas in the future. So any Dhamma doesn't have an existence which you can separate from the whole network of relations and say, this is what that Dhamma is. But the Dhamma is always intricately embedded in this very complex, even infinite web of relations. And so if you pluck a Dhamma out from its network of relations to show this is what it is, it's like taking a cell out of the body to show that's the cell. The cell will die, and with the Dhamma, you don't even have it. It vanishes.
Thank you. I might have been misunderstanding what he said as well, but thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take one more question from the middle, then we'll have a meditation.
Yes, I appreciated what you said about the Abhidhamma being used as a guide for insight
Yeah.
versus kind of getting locked into this conventional versus ultimate reality. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. And then also, is this conventional and ultimate reality similar to how the two truths developed in Mahayana?
I'm going to deal with that tomorrow.
Great.
So let's just put the question off till tomorrow.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, so let us now end the evening with, we'll have a half an hour of meditation. So everybody now should move, transmigrate from